Yeah, I'm Charlie. I'm the director of the BA Psychology program here. I'm also a therapist in private practice. I've been seeing clients for the past 8 years, many of whom come to me to consult with challenges in their life as a result of behaviors informed by substances and sometimes addictions. So what I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about today, and I just want to say up front, I'd really like, I know that there's a number of current students here and a bunch of prospective students as well. I'd like to open this up as a forum, kind of like I like to teach my classes. I don't stand in front of the class and talk at students for 3 hours. I bring my information forward and I invite participation and questions throughout the entire practice. Part of what's so rich in my experience here at Antioch is that it's a school, the BA program is a school for adult learners, so people tend to be coming to school with really rich life experience, which very much becomes a part of the learning, not only for me as the instructor, but certainly for the other students in the classroom as well. So I've been invited to speak with you a little bit about postmodern assumptions that are carried in the treatment of addiction, and I identify as a postmodern therapist. And I also teach a lot of classes that are about different models of psychology and different ways of doing counseling with clients. So I want to start by saying this is not in place of the science that you've been hearing about today, but I invite you to think of it as both and. And my hope here is that this piece of your afternoon is about how we do the dialogue, or one of the ways in which we can do the dialogue when clients do come to consult with us about issues around substances. And as referencing what Lori said, to help make the miracle happen more, right? Dr. Naba talked about lenses, right? So this is a postmodern lens, and these are the assumptions that ground me in my stance as a postmodern therapist, not only as a therapist, but as a person on the planet. These are the values that I hold in the world that I bring into the consultation room with my clients. So I've got a bunch of them here. We'll read and talk through some of them, but again, I really want to invite any questions that you have throughout the process. So how do we do the dialogue? This is my religion. This is my starting point. First assumption I carry in the work: people are inherently resourceful. All people are inherently resourceful. That doesn't mean I sit down and go, oh boy, I hope I can find some resourcefulness in this person. No, resourcefulness exists. It's my job as the counselor, as the therapist, through the kinds of questions that I ask, through the kinds of conversations that I invite, hopefully I'm going to be identifying the resourcefulness in this person that's going to help them in terms of whatever they're struggling with, and in this context, dependence on substances and or addiction. So what we're looking for, we tend to find. That's another way. If we're looking for client dysfunction, we're going to find it. If we're looking for client pathology, we're going to find it. Not so interested in that. I'm looking for client resourcefulness. And when I'm vigilant in that process, guess what I find? I find client resourcefulness. A couple of examples, the kinds of questions that can be asked. Can you tell me how, despite the powerful influence of alcohol, you made the decision to come here today and ask for some help, right? Anytime anyone shows up in my office, I assume there is hope. They may not know what the hope is, but they have called a stranger. They're oftentimes paying a significant amount of money to come sometimes to a strange part of town to talk to somebody about some of the most intimate aspects of their life, right? There is some element of hope there. So my first question with every client is, what is your hope for what our conversations will be able to provide? So I'm not just interested in the problem-saturated story from the past. I am interested in that, but again, it's a both-and situation. I'm also interested in where the client is interested in going as we move forward. What are their values? What are their hopes? What are their dreams for their life? Another example, what quality did you have to call upon in order to escape the pressures of addiction in that moment, right? So it's a both-and situation. There's a problem-saturated story, and there's something that the client wants to be stepping into instead. It's my job to be holding both of those with equal curiosity, but I'm never just going into the problem story without the interest in where they want to move forward. Any thoughts, questions about this so far? Is this sounding heretical at all? Oh, okay, good. The person's not the problem. The problem is the problem. It's not a who, it's a what. That's another way of thinking of it. Problems, including addictions, have their roots in the culture, not within people. Now, I don't mean to discount the field of science and all the remarkable work that's going on now, and with biofeedback. This is the next wave in terms of psychotherapy and psychology, right? So it's a both-and situation. I happen to believe that many people, yes, are born because of biology, genetics maybe, brain functioning, with a predisposition to what we call addictive behaviors, right? But my primary focus is on the context of the culture they live in, and deconstructing that in ways and identifying those influences that push people in the direction of addiction, because I feel it's my job to interrupt that process in ways, again, that are meaningful for the client. Externalizing language separates the person from the problem, allowing space to more clearly evaluate the effects on the problem. So we're not evaluating the sick person, we're evaluating the culture that is constantly bombarding us with messages, oftentimes related to alcohol, to drugs, to sex, to gambling, to not eating too much because you might just not be too attractive, young women, to assist in identifying the preferences that stand outside the problem story. So a person struggling with addiction is going to be the way that I tend to language the situation rather than an addicted person. It is in that space that's created between separating the person from the problem that we're able to identify different stances to take relative to the problem. Some examples. What are some of the ways that the culture, the environment, media, sports, social class, family dynamics has recruited you into an alcoholic lifestyle? What has addiction tried to steal from you that you value? I've been taking a lot of other notes in the afternoon. Context is everything. Next, language matters. Language does not merely describe reality. Language creates our reality. Pay very vigilant attention to the kind of language that we use in consultation with clients. We privilege our clients' language in the naming of problems, goals, and preferred experiences in life. At the same time, I've talked with countless people whose lives have been saved by their connection to 12-step programs, right? And in 12-step programs, people get up and identify as an alcoholic. I don't say we don't use that language here. I'm curious about the meaning that that holds for those individuals. Oftentimes it means community, it means fellowship, it means they're not the only person who's struggling with this. It means that they're getting inspiration from hearing other people's stories, right? This is very valuable. So it's a both-and situation. I tell my students all the time, when they ask that question, well, how do you apply this to 12-step programs? I say, you become bilingual, right? We can learn more than one language. One doesn't have to discount the other. So if it's important for the person to identify as an alcoholic, fantastic. Ready, willing, and able to go there. I'm also going to be very curious about their relationship to alcoholism or an alcoholic lifestyle, or if they choose to identify it as such, to an addiction. Thoughts? Questions? Anything? Good. I see some nodding heads. I'll take that as a positive. Yeah, the whole labeling thing, certainly from a postmodern perspective, we kind of turn an evaluative eye on that, you know, even outside the realm of addiction. You know, the DSM, I use it, but I use it differently than I was taught to use it in graduate school. I don't go to it as, you know, my first stop every time I see have an initial session with a client. I think the danger oftentimes is that some of the diagnoses, if you will, some of the identified disorders can be very totalizing of people's identities. And I see people as more than one thing, right? Especially when they show up in my office. They're wanting to change something in their life. Small change leads to larger changes. Again, this is my religion. This is my starting point, right? Oftentimes clients are willing to dismiss a small exception because it's so tiny in the face of this overwhelming problem, right? Well, it was just that one time, or it was just 5 seconds. Well, okay, can I ask you some more questions about that? I'm curious to see if we can grow that, or how we can grow that one time into 2, that 5 seconds into 10 seconds in support of the client's goals for their lives. Don't let it go. Who in your life wouldn't be surprised that you were able to take this step? What if you're able to grow that 1 time into 2 times, or 10? Would that be of interest to you? How did you manage to take that tiny step in the face of such a problem, such a powerful problem? How did you manage to do that? Another starting point. Change is occurring all the time. Postmodern counseling doesn't engage in normative standards of mental health. Our task is to help the client select and identify those meanings, those changes, and those ways of becoming that they value and would like to see more of. The fact that change is occurring points in the direction of the possible future. As addiction continues to have less and less a hold of your life, what will you be making room for instead? What are the values that you miss, that you want to live into, that addiction is robbing you of currently? And the answers lie in the specifics. So if somebody says, well, yeah, okay, all right, I'll try a 12-step meeting sometime. Oh, yeah, when? Well, I don't know, maybe next week. Whoa, next week, okay. What day? What day do you think would work best given your schedule? I don't know, Saturday or Sunday on the weekend. I don't have to go to work. Oh, Saturday or Sunday. Which day would be more likely to be good for you? I guess Saturday. I've got this brunch thing in the afternoon. Okay, so the brunch is what time? It's around 12 o'clock. Oh, okay, so a meeting before brunch or after brunch? Probably before brunch, right? I don't let it go. The answers lie in the specifics. The more specific we are in identifying specific goals and specific field work, the client is actually forming mental images of themselves following through on that process, and they're going to be much more likely to engage. This is one that is fun. There is no failure, only feedback. We share responsibility for our part in the co-construction of client goals and fieldwork. So a client's lack of follow-through is important feedback, right? Perhaps the goal was too big a step to take at this time. I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, and actually she had identified, wanting to get back into exercise. And I said, great. And she said she was getting very energized by our conversation and was really excited about getting back into it because of the questions that she was asked and reconnecting her to those previous experiences. And I said, so what do you think, like between now and next week? What do you think is a small step? She goes, well, I'm going to sign up to a gym and I'm going to go 7 days, all days in this next week. I said, well, given that you haven't been to the gym in 10 years, maybe we should just rethink that and just scale it back a little bit. So maybe do you have an idea of what gym you might be interested in finding out some information about? Like go online, maybe see what hours they are. And so scaling it back, not wanting to set people up for their own sense of failure, but if they come back the following week and they're like, I screwed up, I didn't do it. See, there I go again. I'll say, well, you know what? I'm going to share responsibility with you for the fact that that didn't happen because we were constructing that together. Maybe we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. So what would it be like for you if we scaled it back even more and took an even smaller step, right? Again, in the face of what we're talking about and these overwhelmingly powerful problems in people's lives, we need to respect the power of those problems. And small change, incremental change, makes a big difference. Yeah, and we don't talk about it, I don't talk about it in terms of the client being resistant, right? The only resistance that I'm interested in is the resistance that a client has to the problem of alcohol or the problem of substance use or the problem of dependence in ways that are undermining their intentions for their lives. That's the kind of resistance that I'm interested in. I always said, I remember being in graduate school and learning sort of the classic definitions of the resistant client, who basically is labeled resistant because they're not doing what I tell them they should do. And my question was, how's that helpful to the client, right? So shared responsibility, right? It's a collaborative process. We're both working in the same direction. The last one I have here is community matters. The unit of treatment is whoever shares a goal and has a desire to reach it. We do not complicate the counseling process by trying to bring people in who do not want to be there. Any client change affects future interactions with all others involved. So we invite people into the counseling session. We go to family sessions with them. I visited clients at rehab up in Malibu countless times because they've invited me to. Kinds of questions. Who else wouldn't be surprised to know of this ability of yours in the face of addiction? And who in your life has ever served as a kind of model in the task of overcoming alcohol addiction? So again, countless lives have been saved by 12-step programs. I've seen it professionally, and I've certainly seen it personally in my family of origin. And alongside of that, I would say there is no one-size-fits-all, right? So everyone who has an alcohol problem, for example, yeah, how many times have people heard other people say, well, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not an addict, right? So if somebody's not comfortable with that language, do you just say, okay, I'm not gonna work with you? No, there's a whole spectrum of kinds of relationships that people have to substances and so-called abuse. So what I appreciate about the postmodern perspective, alongside of all of the messages in 12-step programs, is that it creates room to be able to have kinds of conversations with people with much more diversity in terms of the kinds of relationships that they have, right? And the kinds of problems that they're facing. That's what I've got. Do you have any questions at all? Come on, give me A. Thanks.
Charlie, you and I have worked together, for a bit, so I think I know where you might go with this answer, but I think people might be interested in hearing, you're talking about working with clients and helping to externalize the problem.
Right,
And in the instances you gave, the problem is often, let's say, drugs or alcohol or behaviors. How would you work with people who identify the problem as themselves? They say, I'm a screw up. I'm a loser. That's why I can't do this.
Yeah, so let's go with that. I'm a screw up or I'm a loser. Again, it's what I said earlier. I'll just start using externalizing language, and I think of those as invitations for the client to join me, and those invitations either get taken up or not. So this loserness idea or this loserness identity that you're talking about, is that something that recently developed, or is that something that's been hanging around for a while? So I'll just make the switch from an internalizing to an externalizing and see where it goes. And again, I think of it as invitations. And I love the idea of invitations in terms of the kinds of questions we ask, because again, I think invitations can be taken up or they can be declined. And if they're declined, it doesn't make me wrong. It doesn't make me a bad therapist. It just means to me that's not something that's resonant for the client. What do you got next, Charlie? Next question.
Charlie, I wonder if you might say a bit about how you might draw on other kind of maybe specialized practices in narrative or postmodern work, like interviewing the problem.
Oh yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's great. Oh, I meant to say in the beginning, I teach a year-long training program in postmodern practices and many classes here at Antioch that are over 10 weeks. So I'm giving you all of this in 30 minutes. Yeah, one of the things that I love, I just did this yesterday, in terms of externalizing, actually a guy came in yesterday, first session, and he was talking about anxiety. And he had a really strong relationship with anxiety and feeling very anxious. He knew a lot about it. He had done a lot of work on it. And it was just so clear to me, he had so much knowledge about this relationship. And so I said to him, look, this is an exercise that I like to do with clients. I most oftentimes reserve it for a little later in the work, but you're so knowledgeable. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to do it. And he said, what? I said, well, I'd really love to have a conversation with anxiety. would you be willing to be anxiety so that I can interview anxiety about its relationship with you? And he said, sure. Is it okay if I close my eyes? And I said, sure, do whatever you want. And so then I just began a conversation with anxiety, thanking anxiety for coming into the room. And I've done this with addiction, and I've done this with alcohol, and I've done this a lot with OCD and eating disorders. And what happens every single time, what I'm doing is I'm charting the history of this relationship that the person has with this problem, right? When did it first enter? It's kind of like a real relationship in life. We're personifying the person, or we're personifying the problem as if we're talking to a person. So a very rich story tends to emerge. And what's really interesting, the large majority of the times, there's such a shift in the physicality of the person who's sitting across from me as they embody this problem, and the problem starts getting really boastful and kind of arrogant, and there are physical changes. And I'm curious in asking about what gives it strength in the person's life, and then I'm also very interested in what threatens it. What diminishes its power in the client's life. So then after that conversation, which is often 20 minutes or 30 minutes, we have a deconstructive conversation, myself and the client, about anything that emerged in the context of that conversation with the problem that was either surprising or sounded like new information. And more often than not, there's at least one aha moment in there for the client to realize. And the beauty of it from my perspective is I watch the person literally, physically, take a stand against this thing. So they're no longer evaluating and taking a stand against something sick and wrong in them. They're taking a stand against this force in their life that they really want to get rid of, or at least diminish the power of in their lives. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Charlie, if there's one thing that I wanted to ask about is what have you found the most effective way is to approach a client who really is not seeing the problem? The only problem they're seeing is the flack they're getting from others, whether it be law enforcement or families, that are putting pressure on them to stop, but they really don't see the need to stop.
Okay, so they're coming to see me because these other people are forcing them? They're being forced to. Yeah, you know, I originally encountered this a lot. I worked in a middle school when I was an intern, and I would get this a lot from kids who were told to come to counseling, either by their parents or the teacher. And they'd be like, I don't want to be here. There's nothing wrong with me. It's their problem. And so I would ask them, so what do you think they want to see change in order to get them off your back, right? So what meaning or what value do you think they're attaching to your situation that could actually make a difference if it was able to happen a little bit? So I go with whatever the available information is. I mean, if the client doesn't think there's a problem, I basically believe that clients are always telling me the truth. And if something emerges that sounds contrary to what they said before or other information I received, I'll say, well, wait a minute, there's a gap in my understanding. Last week you said X and now you're saying Y. Can you help me fill in that gap, right? So my first question to answer your question is, why are they coming to see me? What is their hope for what our conversations will be able to provide? And what do they feel is going to be the best use of our time together? And it's kind of the same thing with mandated clients. You know, they don't want to be there. And what I'll do is I'll identify the system that's working on them right now and have deconstructive conversations about the power systems in our culture. Okay, well, there's this judge who's sitting there, you know, and this judge says, you've got to come and talk to me for 12 sessions in order to be able to see your kids again. Well, that's kind of screwed. Yeah, so, you know, I can't sign off unless it happens and give them some report about something that's working well. So is there a little piece of something that you think you might be able to give him? What do you think he wants anyway? What do you think he wants to have happen in this room so you can get what you want to see your kids again? So identify the cultural construct that has created the situation for this person to have to be in the room with me. Yeah. Is that good? All right, great. Thanks.